In the studio with me now is Dr. Kwak Young-hwan, clinical instructor at Soonchunhyang University Hospital here in Seoul. Good morning, Dr. Kwak.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. I know that you must be very busy right now, but let's kick things off right away. Lots of questions for you. So recently, the Korea Centers for Disease Control, KCDC, as well as the CDC in the U.S., added smokers to the risk of high-risk group. So tell us a little bit more about that. And also for us here, where we have some high levels of air pollution, does that mean that we're also at a greater risk because of the high air pollution levels?
Okay, so the habit of smoking seems to affect people in regards to COVID-19 on many different levels. But before I begin talking about smoking, let me first explain briefly about how US CDC came about listing the habit of smoking as a risk factor, and KCDC following their recommendation in respect. So the CDC gathered information and analyzed from about 7,000 confirmed cases in the US that occurred between early February to late March of this year. And this list is basically listing what the more severely ill people had underlying compared to the people with milder cases. And this list included things like cardiovascular problems, diabetes, chronic liver disease, and kidney disease, chronic lung disease, and all sorts of underlying conditions that we can have. But they also added this habit of smoking separately, whether it was a former habit, which constituted about 2.3%, or the current smoking habit, which constitutes about 1.3%. According to their report. So based on these factual and numerical findings, the CDC is recommending currently against smoking. Now, having said that, the lung capability, or as we can say, pulmonary function, can be decreased both from smoking and inhaling fine dust. But currently, smoking is just better known and better proven to cause all kinds of lung diseases that could be accountable for the risk factors that was listed. And the fine dust may also cause people to have such diseases on the long run, but at least for now, cigarettes have been better studied. Now, more importantly, I've just heard that you mentioned a study coming up from China just about a week ago. Many studies have found that smoking actually caused people to have more expressions in their body of what's called an ACE2 in their bodily cells. Now we need to pay a little more attention to this specific enzyme, and this expresses more or so in the lung epithelial cells, which are the cells that come in directly into contact with air and possibly all forms of germs that get into the lungs because it's more exposed to the air. So this ACE2, which is an abbreviation for angiotensin converting enzyme 2, is an enzyme that acts as a catalyst to convert certain inflammatory molecules into vasodilating molecules. These are all scientific terms.
Yes.
Right.
Kind of going over our heads.
Right.
But in layman's terms, what it means is it just makes it easier for these, if the virus does enter our body, for them to sort of latch on. Is that what you're saying, basically?
That's actually exactly what it is. What's very important at this state for this catalyst is that this enzyme has been found to be the attaching site for the coronavirus, sort of like as a door handle of a door into the body, especially for the COVID-19 virus. They studied different viruses with this enzyme, and COVID-19 had the highest affinity on this ACE2 enzyme. So smoking can theoretically make many of these door handles for the virus to attach to, so to let them come into our bodies and obviously making us more vulnerable to the infection.
Right. And we heard in the daily update with Jiyeon that smokers can face a 14 times greater risk of the COVID-19 being much more serious, taking a more serious sort of effect on their bodies. But you're saying it's not just current smokers, but even former smokers should be taking greater care as well, I guess, against infection?
Yes. For that matter, actually, the CDC's reported that the former habit of smoking constituted more than the current smokers, 2.3% against 1.3%. So that's quite a possibility, yes.
Because of the damage that has already been done to the lungs, I guess?
That and plus the ACE2 enzyme that I just mentioned that were probably more expressed throughout the time and accumulated inside the lungs.
Okay. Now I want to turn our attention to the number of imported cases. We are seeing a lot of people coming in to Korea, not just foreigners, of course. The vast majority of them are Korean nationals. And that 14-day mandatory self-quarantine measure has been implemented. Majority, once again, are abiding by that. But how worried are you about it? I mean, we're seeing in the numbers, the daily infections, 50% are coming from overseas. As someone on the front lines, as a medical professional, how worried are you about these imported cases?
I am actually personally quite worried. So after the explosion of numbers of confirmed cases due to many different factors like the cult churches and the cluster infections from elsewhere, we were almost at a phase of seeing possible plateau on the graph up until probably couple of weeks ago.
Right.
But now the city of Seoul and probably Gyeonggi province are showing a sharp turn up on the angles on their respective graphs again. What worries me about this trend are actually two things in particular. One is the fact that even though we are currently managing, the number of cases by itself can be a threat to the level of medical responses that we can give. If the speed of the rise in the numbers increase again to exceed what the medical facilities can handle, that's when all hell can break loose, basically. That I'm hoping will never happen here, but that just might have been the situations the doctors and nurses faced early in China.
Can I just intercept here? Do
Sure.
we have like a certain number where we think that this is the threshold, like 100 a day, 200 a day? Do you have that sort of a threshold
I
number?
believe they would have it. It's just not in my head right
Okay,
now.
all right.
Right.
Now, what's the second factor?
Right.
that
So
you're
the
worried
number
about?
two is the fact that the influx of the patients actually is in addition to the source that we already have here. We have been managing the spread of the virus that happened mostly through the sources within the country. But now many of the newly found cases are actually from overseas or actually from those who have been in contact with the person from overseas.
Like the
So-
family members? Yeah.
Exactly. And we've already started seeing not only secondary infections, but we already started seeing tertiary infections that actually got in from overseas.
So we would explain it by saying someone came from overseas, infected a family member, and then that family member infected someone else.
Yes, that's exactly
see.
right. So even though the 14-day mandatory quarantine can probably serve as a buffer, it's just my personal take on this. I personally think that a more aggressive measure can be taken by the government at this point as to maybe even limit the number of people being let into the country, sort of in an attempt to adjust the speed of inflow.
Right.
So we would have a medical sector has enough resources left in hand to be better able to care for the newly appearing cases.
Right. So your personal opinion is not that we block all entries, but at least we can manage the flow of them, blocking the numbers maybe so that we can better deal with the number of confirmed cases.
Right, exactly. And
Right.
and I have to emphasize it's just my personal view on this.
Right. Now, can anyone get tested? I mean, we have heard in many different countries that it's actually impossible to get tested until you're actually showing the relevant symptoms. We know that in Korea, it's a little relatively, I guess, easier to get tested, but can anyone do so? And especially if they're willing to pay for it?
And I'll be honest here, people can actually pay to get tested for the virus if they want it, but the cost is usually not so cheap. There's a number in my head. I'm not sure if I can actually tell you this here.
It's fine. I think it's about 170 million, thousand.
That's actually it's a little more than that.
It's
To
a little
my
bit more.
knowledge, it's a little bit higher than 200,000 won. To my
Okay.
knowledge, it's around 220, 230,000 won.
Okay.
And that's only if the people are just getting the test out of their own curiosity. But also, I want to recommend, because certain facilities may have limitations to resources, like the testing kits and personnels. And so I would actually not recommend at this point for everyone to get tested just out of their curiosities. But only those with suspicious symptoms, as you've said, or who have been in contact with the confirmed person will get the test paid by the government.
Actually, I wanted to talk about those tests and especially the accuracy of those tests as well, because there have been some media reports that perhaps 30% of all test results may actually be false negative. So they have the virus, but it's coming out negative. And then maybe, I don't know, later test would actually come out as positive as well. In that case, that seems quite disturbing. And then considering that 25% of all infections, they don't have any symptoms at all, it could breed a sort of a false sense of security in many people as well. So then, does that mean that people should be taking more than one test, especially if they have been in potential contact with confirmed cases?
Um, let me clarify myself here first. There have been many different reports in regards to the accuracy of the test.
Right.
I was just talking to my colleague at a very prestigious hospital just last night about this issue, and he was telling me that he's certain that the accuracy of this test is almost 99 to 100%.
The one that we're using currently
The one
in
that we
Korea.
are currently using in Korea. So, if I may continue on this issue, there have been discussions over the sensitivity of the test currently, but we don't actually have the ultimate method of diagnosis to compare the current one to. So actually, there's really no way for us to find out or whom we actually might be missing with the current test. But
Right.
that being said, the method we're using still the RT-PCR method that we call, by definition, is very precise because it detects tiny pieces of DNA materials amplified from the specimen achieved from a person. So, of course, there are chances for errors in different steps of the way of the testing, such as a possibility for human error while scratching off inside the nostrils or throat, or that site that was scratched could happen to be just negative while some adjacent tissues were positive and
Right.
such. But so because of this, when we do these tests, we try to minimize the possible error by doing tests from as many different sites as possible. Currently, we scratch off inside both nostrils and tonsils, and we put both of these two different sites into one tube in the testing to boost the chances of
I see.
detection. But not only that, we also add another set of tests on top of this, which is done with the phlegm given by the person. And also, the people who tested negative are still told to come back for another set of tests if they continue to have symptoms. So those are still the advisory measures that we take inside the screening centers. So at this point, I really don't think everyone should be tested multiple times unless they have a really strong suspicion that they might be having a virus. In which case, the medical persons in charge would already have advised the person to be tested again anyways.
All right. This weekend, of course, there were very tragic news. We saw the death of the first medical personnel on the front lines fighting COVID-19. He was in Daegu, which was, of course, the epicenter, or still is the epicenter of the outbreak here in Korea. But I imagine his death must have had a huge impact on fellow medical professionals and healthcare workers, on their morale, and also maybe amplified the fears that you have. I know that a lot of medical personnel are worried for their family members as well. Some are actually taking extreme measures and living separately as well. So how has that affected you?
I would actually be lying if it did not have an impact on
Right.
us. Just over the past weekend or so, we had a lot of colleagues and friends posting their condolences on their SNS and etc. But I try my best to stand neutral about this issue because being overly worried isn't really going to help us at all at this point. So I think as long as we follow proper guidelines, like properly wearing protective gears and sanitizing ourselves every so often, we should not have any reason to be overly worried. However, just at this point, I wish there were just more protective gears to go around for medical workers in the country. We currently do have daily pensions of masks at our hospital for all medical personnel, but they are not actually medical grade masks. And also the level D coats that you usually see on the TV, the people wearing white coats all over,
Right.
that seems to be running a little tight. So they're only provided to the people who are actually doing the tests inside the room. So for other people like ourselves, consulting and treating inside the screening room, we're getting by wearing disposable surgical coats and having plastic coverings on top and etc. But all in all, because these alternative measures should also suffice in their protection level, I can't really say that I'm scared for life about from the virus, but I'm just doing my best to protect myself.
And hopefully everyone is taking extra precautionary measures as well. Speaking of masks, now that the US and all these European countries are also now recommending some sort of face covering, is that because there is the possibility that we can just kind of breathe in these sort of aerosolized droplets that apparently hang in the air for 3 hours to different, I guess, degrees of infection? But is there a big risk of actually doing that? Because in the weekend, you must have also noticed the warm weather brought
Yeah.
people out. A lot of people were wearing masks, but at the same time, I think they're thinking, well, we're outside, so there's not a big risk of actually inhaling these viral droplets. What's your opinion on that?
It's sort of yes and no for that question. If somebody was to say some uninfected person was walking in front of me on the outdoors and he sneezed or he or she sneezed or
Infected or not infected?
let's say he's infected.
Okay.
You're right. And he was just passing by, let's say, at least 2 meters apart. Would there be a chance that I might get it just walking behind him? I would say that's almost slim to none.
Okay.
So I think the chance is really slim for those sort of things to happen. Droplets actually do hang in the air, and they are proven to be staying there for many hours. But as I said, they disperse very, very easily outdoors, especially in the flowing air. I can probably compare this to a drop of an ink in water, possibly. If we were to drop a drop of an ink into a bowl of water, we would probably see that bowl stained by the ink. And the drop will probably have an effect dense enough to stain that one bowl full of water. But if we drop that ink into, let's say, Han River, or even a stream of water just flowing, that ink will be gone in 1 second.
Okay.
So unless people, so people are put into confined space, aerosols or droplets would have such matter. But if they're walking outside, relatively speaking, they would have much less chance.
Hence the importance of ventilating well when you are indoors, whether it's your home or office as well. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Kwak Young-won, for taking the time to join me in the studio and to give us those very detailed answers about COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you.